Horror movies bear a great burden compared to their other genre companions. Revolving around murderous antics and plentiful bad guys, they have to choose precisely the right time to let us in on their dirty little secrets, building tension through mysterious villains with mysterious motives until we're paid off with one big reveal. Who could be behind the strange black shadow that has been stalking our sexy students? Is the old legend of Jimmy Stabhands really coming true? Are we stuck in a weirdo's paranoid delusion? And most importantly, was it all just a dream? When these movies play their hand, it is a make or break moment. Unfortunately, that means lots of films manage to bungle it and completely ruin whatever goodwill they had brewed up until that point, blowing their load in what amounts to nothing more than a weak fizzle when we should be getting fireworks. Whether they come at the wrong time, are completely misguided, or if Jimmy Stabhands just isn't that compelling when he's turned into boring old normie Jimmy, bearing all is a tricky horror trope to master. And as you've probably guessed by now, these films definitely have not done that. I am the vengeful caretaker posing as Jimmy Stabhands, Ash from What Culture, and these are 8 horror movies with the worst killer reveals. 8. Identity. TIMMY. Identity, a criminally underrated horror movie, depicts 10 strangers being hunted down one by an unknown murderer at an isolated motel. Of course, it features that memorable plot twist in which it turns out that the characters in the film are actually all separate personalities inside the mind of a killer. Honestly, it's way better than it sounds and works for the most part. The premise lies in one of the personalities, which is a particularly murderous one as would have it, that is killing off all the other personalities in cold blood. Eventually assumed to be an escaped convict that is dressed up as a correctional officer to break them and his inmate friends out. However, once all of this is dealt with, Identity just can't help itself. It shoehorns in one last twist that reveals the real killer to be Timmy, a 9-year-old boy who staged his death earlier in the film. Again, Identity is pretty good, but Timmy should have just been left well alone. Having a little boy as the big bad just felt a little too silly, and given that the film is so full of outlandish and for the most part entertaining plot twists, this final jab felt like one too many to tip the scales out of its favour. Playing into the strengths of the surprise convict reveal would have worked far better in making the movie an undoubtedly brilliant one, as much as the Timmy twist plays into the schlockier side of Identity's nature. 7. Friday the 13th, The New Beginning. Roy Burns. This highly underappreciated installment of the Friday the 13th franchise did make the wise choice of ditching Jason Voorhees and having another killer instead. But while the film largely works, it arguably could have chosen its killer much better. The murderer turns out to be Roy Burns, some random paramedic who appeared briefly earlier on to collect the body of Joey, who was living at the residential treatment facility where the film is set. And Joey himself had been killed by one of the other patients. Roy then dressed up as the deceased Jason Voorhees and went on the rampage against the facility's other patients. It's revealed after Roy is killed that Joey was Roy's son, and that Roy blamed those at the facility for Joey's death. It was sensible to introduce a new killer, as Jason was already getting a bit stale by this point. But Roy was not the right choice. He was only a minor character, and viewers would have forgotten all about him right up until the ending, meaning this reveal carried no weight. Thanks to the film's weak reception, Jason was resurrected for the remaining sequels. So you have Roy to thank for that whole mess. 6. Saw 3D. Dr. Lawrence Gordon. While Mark Hoffman is the killer for most of this atrocious final installment in the Saw franchise, and I say final with a heavy helping of sarcasm, Dr. Lawrence Gordon from the original movie is revealed to be another one of Jigsaw's apprentices in a final twist. He then proceeds to kill Hoffman as a punishment for murdering Jill Tuck, Jigsaw's ex-wife. This was a terrible final reveal which fell flat for 2 main reasons. Firstly, everyone guessed that Gordon would be a new apprentice as soon as the actor was announced to be returning, so this was a painfully obvious plot twist from the get-go. Secondly, it doesn't make a hint of sense. Why on earth would Gordon happily join forces with the man who nearly killed him and tried to murder his wife and daughter? He wasn't the most sympathetic character in the original movie, but nothing hinted he'd turn out to be psychopath material. It would have been far better to bring Gordon back in a heroic role, seeking revenge against Jigsaw and his apprentices realistically. At the very least, it certainly would have made a lot more sense and been considerably more interesting. 5. Black Christmas 2006. Agnes. This ghastly remake of the terrific 1974 slasher film Black Christmas makes many huge mistakes, with one of the biggest being giving the killer, who was entirely unseen in the original, an unnecessary backstory about an abusive, incestuous family. That was bad enough, but throwing in a completely pointless second killer made it all even worse. As well as the main murderer Billy, his sister/daughter Agnes is also killing off a group of luckless sorority girls. With slasher films, it is generally better to just have one killer, as 2 or more murderers tends to feel like an overload unless you're Wes Craven. And that certainly is not the case here. Agnes is not only a thoroughly cliched and dull villain, but all the stuff about incest was just too much, and veered right into shock for shock's sake territory. The right approach would have been to just have Billy doing the murders, and most importantly, leave his backstory the hell out of it. We all know that's part of what made other killers, like the original's Unidentified Monster, and others like Michael Myers, work. And you don't with the OG. It is right enough to try and make something new out of an old concept. But bloody hell, not like this. 4. Happy Death Day to You, Gregory Butler. While Happy Death Day was a horror comedy, Happy Death Day to You was way more of a science fiction film, meaning the masked killer faded into irrelevance. Still, there was a big reveal at the end sifted in to pop audiences, and oh boy, did it suck hard. In the original, protagonist Tree's roommate Laurie was the killer in an excellent twist, who repeatedly murdered Tree in the time loop she was trapped in. Happy Death Day to You takes place in an alternate dimension with another time loop, however, in which someone new is trying to kill Tree, Dr. Gregory Butler. Butler was the professor Tree was having an affair with in the first film, and this motivated a jealous Laurie to kill her. While in this reality, Butler is going after Tree to cover up their affair. This was a terrible choice of villain, since Butler is an uninteresting character, and he felt like the laziest, most obvious pick for the new murderer. Throwing his wife in was somehow even worse too. This is another sad reminder about just how little the sequel cared about the horror elements, instead settling for a cliched multiverse storyline. A far better choice for the killer would have been one of the other students, especially Danielle, Tree's hilariously obnoxious sorority colleague. 3. Prom Night 1980, Alex. In Prom Night, a murderer attacks a group of teens who accidentally caused the death of young girl Robin when they were kids and covered it up. If this sounds familiar, that isn't surprising, since this scenario is highly similar to the first act of I Know What You Did Last Summer. Ironically, whilst that movie had a good reveal of the main killer, this older depiction of a similar story fell flat with its villain. Prom Night's killer is Alex, the brother of both Robin and protagonist Kim, as he had witnessed his sister's death all those years earlier. And unfortunately, despite lots of genre love surrounding the title, it has got to be said that this reveal is highly unsatisfying. Alex not only barely appears, but seems too benevolent to be a killer, so him being the murderer feels highly contrived. As well as this, at the end, Jamie Lee Curtis's protagonist ends up killing her brother when he attacks her boyfriend, and the film ends with her crying over the death of another sibling. This ultra-dark ending felt wildly out of place in what was simply a trashy, low-budget slasher flick. All in all, it was just a bit too much. 2. The Bone Collector, Richard Thompson / Marcus Andrews. When a serial killer movie reveals the secret identity of a killer, the response should be one of shock and astonishment. It should not be, wait, who's that again? That was the case with this since largely forgotten movie, which features a quadriplegic detective working with a street cop to catch a serial killer in New York. The serial killer who's kidnapping people in a taxi and killing them in some devilishly gruesome murders turns out to be some random character, Marcus Andrews, going by the fake name of Richard Thompson, who's appeared briefly in 2 other scenes as a technician who maintains the protagonist's medical equipment. This revelation doesn't work, since it was such a minor character, while Andrews himself is simply laughable. He comes across as a whiny nerd instead of a depraved killer. And his motives, the protagonist wrote a report that revealed he had planted evidence, thus landing him in jail, feel highly petty. With serial killer movies like this, there has to be a good twist at the end, and that was something this flick sorely lacked. It's a pretty good movie, but the payoff feels subpar comparatively. 1. Scream 3. Roman Bridger. Scream 3 is easily the worst of the otherwise consistent Scream franchise. And while the other 3 films all have awesome reveals of the killer's identity, in this case, the big reveal just sucked. The Ghostface killer here is Roman Bridger, the director of Stab 3, which is a film within a film based on the Ghostface murders in the prior Scream movies. Roman is an enormously uninteresting character who didn't even appear much throughout the film. In fact, some might not even recognize him when he first unmasks. More irritatingly still, the big revelations that he is Sidney Prescott's half-brother, that he's seeking revenge because their mother never acknowledged him, and also encouraged the murders in the original Scream were a highly contrived and forced attempt to tie the three films together. It was just impossible to believe such a boring character caused the trilogy's events. Frustratingly, Scream 3 originally had a far better ending. The killer would have been a large group of teenage fans of the Stab films. Unfortunately, but understandably, this storyline felt rather insensitive since it was only a year after the Columbine High School massacre, so this ending was scrapped. Still, it would have been nice to see any better ending than this one. And that's our list. What other villain reveals had you rolling your eyes? High Tension was on this list, but I thought you'd heard enough about that, so if you've got any other picks, share your thoughts in the comments section below. I've been Ash, and this has been What Culture. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and come back again for some more lovely film content. Thanks for watching.